I can't hear you, Victor.
Sorry, I was on mute this entire time. My bad. Um, well, Reed, it's so great to see you. Thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So let's talk about where this Republican Party is. But I want to start off by asking you about a moment in Washington, D.C. that maybe not a lot of people know about because it's sort of the prom for political junkies and nerds. And that moment was the White House Correspondence Dinner. I'm wondering what you thought of President Biden and his performance there.
I thought he did a very good job. Obviously, traditionally, this is the part where the president gets up and he gives a little bit of a stand-up routine, regardless of who it is. Trump, very famously was insulted by Barack Obama. It was funny, so Trump didn't have a sense of humor, but that was the kind of thing where Trump just wasn't going to really participate. But I would say this is, as I understand it, my co-founder at the Lincoln Project, Rick Wilson, was in the room. He was invited and said that there was a lot of dancing on needles here to see how the president was going to do, and he came through strong. He's very good, right? This is a guy who's his experience and his abilities behind a microphone, behind a podium, I think are very good. And the crowd was impressed, and I think that in the time that we're in, especially with all this hullabaloo about his age, I think it was important to see all the intelligentsia and the chattering class in Washington, D.C. see him perform and perform well.
Absolutely, and I want to talk to you about his age because that's a lot. What I guess a lot of people are concerned about, or there's a lot of talk about it. But I thought the moment that he talked about his age at the dinner, and he could use that going forward on the campaign trail, which is, I might be old, but I'm experienced, I'm wise. I'm wondering how you think President Biden should frame his age, and maybe get people to understand that perhaps it's more of an advantage than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I remember back in 1984 when Ronald Reagan famously said, "I will not use my
Yes, yes.
opponent's youth and inexperience to my advantage," and it just brought the House down, and it totally neutralized the issue.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that the president making light of it in an appropriate context, like he did here, was the right thing to do. Again, I think leaning back on the fact that there is probably literally no one with more experience in how all of government in Washington, D.C. can and should work than him. And I think that you saw that, at the State of the Union address as well, where he walked Kevin McCarthy and the entire Republican members of Congress into a box can, Social Security and Medicare. He has been around a long time. That there's no question about that. But he is a wily veteran. He knows exactly how to work this stuff. He has an excellent team around him. And look, this is not 1945, right, where 80 would be seen as you're the one outliving expectations. If 50 is the new 40 and 60 is the new 50, then 80 is the new 70. And I think this is
Yes,
not
yes.
someone this president who has a history of real health issues. And so I think that he's up for the job as much as anybody. And let's be clear that his likely opponent, Donald Trump, is not exactly what I'd call the picture of health.
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely. Well, I want to ask you, just before I get into some of the Republican craziness, what you see as the biggest challenges for the Biden campaign heading into 2024. What are the issues you think they should be focusing on? What are some of the roadblocks you think that they should be expecting, and how do they navigate those?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I thought last week when they launched the campaign with the video, I thought from my perspective anyway, it was exactly the right tone.
Hmm.
Freedom,
Hmm.
individual liberty,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Frankly, taking a lot of things that Republicans for decades used as their talking points. The fact that the president of the United States and
Yes,
a
yes.
Democrat, a lifelong Democrat, is able to use that kind of language and use it well shows you how far afield the Republican Party is from anything resembling normal. But I think that the things that are the most troublesome for any White House, but any campaign, are the externalities, the things that you just don't know about. We can see that Kevin McCarthy and Marjorie Taylor Greene are trying to take the country over a cliff with this debt ceiling fight, specifically to cause chaos. And if it means that you have to affect 330 million Americans negatively to make Joe Biden look bad, that's a step they're willing to take. Again, I think the things that are most troubling are the ones that you just don't know about until you've got to deal with them. But I think you can already see that, Nikki Haley, who, wants to be seen as this sort of sensible, normal Republican, is already, making, indications that, the president won't survive a second term. Like that's just, I mean, it just shows you where they're willing to go. And Nikki Haley considers herself normal, right? So I think that the age thing will be an issue, but you've got the president and the White House and the campaign are doing the right thing about heading it off. Again, making this about freedom, about individual liberty, right? Talking to your generation, right? Older voters, whether or not that's silent generation, boomers, even Gen Xers, are still, more conservative than they are liberal, slightly more Republican. But the truth is that in the states that matter, we saw both in 2020 where it was a narrow outcome, in 2022 where it was, a broader outcome. The Republicans are having a real difficult time making the case for why any of them should be in charge.
Absolutely. And I think that framing is also so important because regardless of whether or not you like Joe Biden or not, he always has this one quote, which is don't compare me to the almighty, but compare me to the alternative. And I think using that freedom messaging is so smart because you may not like him, but at the end of the day, your freedoms, your rights are at stake. And there's only one party and president who will protect them. And that's the Democratic and President Biden. So I want to move into this Republican Party right now. And I want to start in Montana because there's some concerning things out of there. They silenced Zoe Zephyr after she spoke out against this one anti-transgender bill. And it seems like there's this kind of pattern within the Republican Party to silence the opposition, to suppress votes that falls in line with what's happening across the country where Republicans want to stifle the youth vote and people of color. And so I'm wondering, and my question to you is, where are they trying to go with all of this? And will it ever stop, do you think?
Well, let me answer the second question first. No, it will not stop. The Republican Party is now fully within the grasp of the black hole that they themselves helped create, and that gravitational pull will only suck them deeper into it. It will not allow them to escape, nor do any of them seem to want to. On the silencing and stifling of debate, we saw it in Montana. But yeah, I would say this is that the goons in Montana learned from the goons in Tennessee, which is I think they really thought about expelling her, and then they saw what happened with the Justins and how that has blown up in their faces, and is still they are still trying to recover from the wreckage of that bad decision and I would say not even immoral, amoral decision. And so the silencing though is also equally troubling, but this is not going to stop. Look, Victor, as I said, your generation, right, Gen Z, saved our bacon last year, and you're likely to save our bacon again next year and for really generation, 10 or 20 or 30 or 40, 50 years to come. They know that, right? They know that. That's why they are worried about things like on-campus voting. That is why they are worried about, understanding how it is that your generation, right, those younger voters who are left of center, right? You may not be Democrats necessarily, right? But you are certainly more progressive than most Americans. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But again, they are worried about that because they know that as the baby boom generation starts to go the way of the dodo, right? You all are going to rise and rise and rise along with your millennial counterparts. And that's bad for them, right? Demographically, it's bad for them politically. And so they are trying to do everything. And look, this is the whole ballgame, Victor, right? This is the same thing you see with the judiciary. This is the same thing you see with the Supreme Court. It's the same thing you see with the sort of what I'll call the neo-Confederate states, right? They know time is not on their side, which is why they have to do all this stuff now. They know that the culture wars are not on their side. That's why they're trying to lock in a culture, of the 1950s, the early 1950s, as opposed to, the second or the third decade of the 21st century, which is the world is moving away from them increasingly fast, and they're trying to do everything they can to hit the brakes on it. But what we got to do in the next 18 months, Victor, is make sure that everybody we know who is on the side of democracy, decency, freedom gets out there and participates, whether or not that's knocking on a door, whether or not that's sending a text message, whether or not that's part of being a group, right, whether virtually or in person, but ultimately making sure we all get out to the polls next November.
Absolutely. And do you think, what Republicans are doing right now, are enough people realizing and paying attention to what they're doing? Or do you think people are just kind of sweeping this under the rug and just viewing this as normalcy within the party. I mean, how do we get Republicans and independents to kind of wake up to this reality and vote against kind of what they're trying to do?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say this is that I don't know that they're sweeping it under the rug necessarily. I think, like most Americans, those soft Republicans and independents are doing what most Americans try to do, which is live their lives, right? The whole idea of a representative democracy is that you elect people you believe know what they're doing and will work in your best interests, right? As far as the Republican Party in this country is concerned, we know that that's just fundamentally not the case anymore. And so, from my perspective, it's important. And look, we focus specifically on those key electoral college states: Arizona, Nevada, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, to continually communicate to those folks, right? That this is not the party you grew up in, right? This is not the party that you've ever been a part of. You might have voted for Trump in 2016 because a lot of those voters we're talking about, Victor, were just never going to be able to cast a ballot for Hillary Clinton. We could do a whole hour on that. They didn't vote for Trump in 20. They probably didn't vote for the Republican gubernatorial candidate in their state in 2022. And now we have to keep them away from the GOP and say, this is still not your party. Don't have anything to do with these people. You don't want to do this. And I guess I once asked a friend, who considers himself a Republican, but says he, quote unquote, Victor, doesn't like Trump. I'm like, but you're okay sitting at the table with the Camp Auschwitz guy. He really didn't like that. Right. And I'm not saying you should always message like that. But ask the question, call the question continuously. Is this who you are? Are these the people you want to sit
Right.
with? And I think for most of them, at least for these gettable voters, the answer is no.
Yeah, it's the alternative that matters. So, Reed, thank you so much for all that you do, and thank you so much for your voice. I really enjoyed talking to you this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, thanks so much. Well, Reed is always good, and sorry everyone for the technical difficulties. Like I said, today was the first day of this conference in Los Angeles, and I'm now in this corridor, but we are all set. Hopefully it wasn't too noisy, but hopefully you enjoyed that episode with Reed Galen. He always is able to put things into context, and his work at the Lincoln Project and also Resolute Square is extremely powerful and important right now. So go check Reed out if you haven't already. He's on Twitter, he's on Instagram. He does some really good content, writes great pieces for Resolute Square. So check that out. There's a couple things I want to get to before the day starts, or I guess the day ends, and that's just some of the weekend updates. First, like I said at the outro, at the introduction, Joe Biden was at the White House Correspondence Dinner, and he had a really just great time. I think it was one of the best shows of President Biden. He was relaxed, he was calm, he really threw punches at these Republicans. And the sad part is that it wasn't even kind of a joke at some points. I mean, a lot of things he said were just completely true. One of my favorite parts is when he said, NBC is owned by, or MSNBC is owned by NBC Universal, Fox is owned by Dominion. He had some great other one-liners. If you find yourself, uncomfortable or lost getting home, it's either because you're drunk or you're Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, just such great lines. And so, first off, props to all of the people at the White House who worked on this speech, who made it funny. Jen Psaki was on Simone Sanders' show, and it was funny because she said that for political speechwriters and people in comms, the one thing that they don't want to do is to write jokes, because you have to basically land a joke, and it's hard trying to be funny. But I thought they did a great job. President Biden, and at the end, he wore on his, he wore his aviators and channeled his inner Dark Brandon, which I thought was such a fun and good moment. So let me know what you thought of the White House Correspondents' Dinner. I was particularly impressed. I think after that night, there really is no kind of argument for his age anymore. He really showed he has the stamina, he has the endurance, I think, to last 2024. I mean, it was kind of Joe Biden at his best, and I hope that he can channel more of that energy that we saw on Saturday into 2024, because I think a lot of voters really need to hear both the truth, and I think humor is also a really effective way to reach people. So let me know what you thought of that, and we can definitely kind of debrief as we head into the week. There's some other things that I thought were interesting. First is Greg Sargent from the Washington Post had this really awesome opinion piece in the Washington Post about kind of what we were talking about today with Reed Galen, which is how Democrats are spinning what Republicans have once traditionally kind of really hammered home, which is freedom, individual liberty, family issues. You saw that with President Biden's ad. And I think for Democrats going into 2024, we shouldn't shy away from adopting those messages, because I think they're important. And on any one of those, think about the right to an abortion. Freedom is sort of that all-encompassing thing that Republicans seem to be against at every single moment. They don't want you to be safe from gun violence. They don't want you to be able to control your own body. They don't want you to be able to, live a healthy lifestyle. And they don't want you, to have Social Security, Medicare, and all of those issues. They're trying to control you. And I think that's the important framing that Greg Sargent was trying to get through his piece, is that for Democrats, we have to capitalize on that framing, because we are the party that is adopting those messages and those issues right now. It's not the Republican Party, and we can't let them get away with that. So for me, that was a particularly powerful piece. And if you haven't checked it out, go to the Washington Post, the opinion section. Greg Sargent has a great piece, and we'll definitely, I think it'll be an important piece as we head into 2024 for a lot of the Democratic messaging. That's all the news that I have for you this morning. I'll be back tomorrow with another episode of On the Move. You don't want to miss that. This week we have some great guests that you don't want to miss. Obviously today was Reed Galen. Tomorrow is going to be Stuart Stevens, also from the Lincoln Project in Resolute Square. On Wednesday, it's going to be Miles Taylor, and then on Thursday we're going to have on Gloria Johnson from the Tennessee Three to talk about what's happening across the state legislatures and why all of us should be paying attention to what's happening with Republicans and this push to, I think, enact fascism. So we have some great guests lined up for you this week. Friday, it'll just be Ask Me Anything series. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll get to them and try to answer your questions as soon as I can. So thank you everyone for tuning in today. Again, apologies for the technical difficulties, but hopefully you enjoyed this episode with Reed Galen. Again, check him out. He's a great voice. And I thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And I'll be back tomorrow at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern, right here on